You know those projects that you have a perfect image in your head for, and no matter what you do, you just can't quite make the reality look like that? This was one of those projects for me. If you follow my channel, you may know that I've been on a bit of a mushroom kick lately. I made little mushrooms and medium mushrooms, and now it was time to make the big mother mushroom. The big religious icon and telepathic link between all the goblins, so it had to be a pretty cool mushroom. I started out with your standard pink XPS foam, shaped it, and used some sandpaper to kind of give it a more organic feel. I thought I might try to hollow it out somehow at first and decided against that pretty quick. It was pretty labor intensive. For the mushroom stem, I thought a pool noodle would be just the right diameter, so I shaped it up using a X-Acto knife and some sandpaper. If you do this, I do recommend wearing a respirator. It created a lot of dust particles in the air to breathe in. While I waited for my hot glue gun to heat up, I made a grid on top of the mushroom so it'd be playable, and glued it in place. I'd already made this ugly rent in the bottom of my mushroom, so I carved out a bigger section so I could put the top of a wine bottle light string into the top, so the whole thing would light up for a bit more of a fantastical, magical feel. At least that's what I was going for. I'll leave it up to you whether I made the mark or not. The next order of business was to make sure that the majestic mother mushroom did not fall over constantly, so I put a little bit of foam on the bottom, shaped it up, glued on a bit of sand and gravel, and went ahead with my black Mod Podge layer. This really helped. It was super tippy before, and at this point I was really happy with it. I was excited, I thought it was coming together perfectly, and I had this idea in my head of this kind of dark, moody color palette with like hopefully glowing runes coming up it. I had these metallic pens I thought would be perfect, and I thought for sure it would all come together beautifully. I went with a slightly blue tinge in the stem and a slightly green tinge in the top, just to give it a bit of variation, hopefully a bit of depth. And I did a couple coats of those colors each. I was especially excited about this color palette because I thought for sure the darker colors would set it off against the kind of more neon that we'd been going with for our smaller mushrooms. Kind of set it apart, make it special, make it look a little bit more like an elder, separate, ephemeral thing, like it's supposed to be. Once the metallic pens came out, I was pretty happy with it at first, especially with the contrast against the darker colors. But once I kind of got going a little farther, I thought it just sort of looked, I don't know, like someone had graffitied it. So I looked up actual mushrooms, and I thought these blue ones looked really cool. So I started from scratch, threw everything out, and decided it was time to try something a little different. The blue mushrooms really spoke to me. There were lots of really neat examples out there, but the blue ones just looked so otherworldly that I thought they'd be perfect for my fantasy setting. So a nice light blue for the stem, a darker blue for the top, a couple coats of each, and I was already much happier than I had been with the darker color set. My mother's an artist, and I think she just passed on to me a love of bright, colorful things, because that's the palette I've really stuck with for this entire, mushroom forest build. Adding the white accents around the rim and the dry brushing across the whole mushroom, I felt gave it a bit of depth. I wasn't 100% thrilled with it, but it was better than nothing. Doing up the base, I went with kind of brown and gray at first, and then stippled it with a little bit of purple, a little bit of green to make it more magical and swampy. And then we came to what I think was my best decision in the whole project. So when I was looking at images of mushrooms, one thing really stuck out to me, and that was how they all looked just a little bit wet all the time. So it seemed to be the default state of many mushrooms. So I broke out the epoxy, poured it over the top of the mushroom, and then used a foam brush to pick up any excess and brush it over the rest of the build. If you work with epoxy at all, be careful to only use things you don't mind throwing out, because it will wreck everything it touches. Here's the final build in amongst all the other medium and small mushrooms and a few tokens for scale. As promised, the top is playable. I'm not unhappy with how this build turned out, but it's not my favorite. Let me know what you think in the comments, and until next time, happy crafting!